Welcome, porters, to another lore summary video. I am Fragile Boson, your logistics support officer. This lore summary will cover everything the game wants you to know about bridges, and I've also added into this category not just bridges, but the UCA in general and Fragile Express, along with some sprinklings of information about individual preppers. This will cover Chapter 3 right up until the large weather event that takes place at the end of your delivery to South Knot City. So to avoid any spoilers, you should have completed the game up to that point. Let's get started. When Bridges 1 arrived on the west coast of the lake, William made rounds to interview the local preppers, and they were unwilling to join the UCA at that time. They weren't the type to follow the herd. The elder writes an email to Sam to ask him, what benefit does the UCA and Bridges brings? It seems no different than his contract with Fragile Express, which is a good question. You know, like, if he's already getting his deliveries, why does he need the UCA? Why does he need Bridges at all? And of course, we know the benefits of the chiral network, but for a prepper that wants to stay out in the wilderness and out of contact with everyone, it doesn't seem a surprise that somebody would be so unwilling to kind of make the leap, if you can say that. The craftsman that you meet in Chapter 3 sees the UCA as some sort of loss of privacy, and he calls it a tax, and eventually he decides to join the UCA. So he sees it as like he's paying a tax and loss of his privacy for deliveries and Sam's services along with protection. The engineer brings Evo-Devo unit testing for Bridges to help make improvements and has a big interest in the Adra deck. Now, there will be a general science video from Chapter 3 that will cover what is Evo-Devo tech, among a number of other things. Suffice it to say for now, this is evolutionary biological technology. The engineer he has this huge interest in improving the Adra deck, and we know from one of his emails that Adra decks weren't originally designed for BBs or BT detection, but detecting people and objects. They were kind of like all-purpose scanners, and we know that several features were cut from Adra decks, things like hologram projection, chiral data reconstruction, and the engineer seems interested in perhaps improving the Adra deck with these features in the future. And we don't see some of these features actually added into the game, but I think that this is an interesting email because this kind of tells us what we could see improved in the Adra deck for Death Stranding 2, at least some allusions of additional features that we could see in the future. Thomas Sutherland writes, Sam concerned about the possible rise once again of bots, and this comes after you unlock the delivery bot, and he kind of wonders out loud, why use bots if that's what led to drone syndrome in the first place? But Mama seems very convinced that this is different this time, and bots will not lead to drone syndrome like they did in the future. If you don't know what drone syndrome is, check my lore video on mules and chiralium from the prologue to Chapter 2. Several Bridges members make delivery requests for Timefall beer after you bring the Timefall farm onto the chiral network, and I just thought this was a cool little touch. The beer is a porter you find from one of the interviews, an English ale that's been around since the 1700s, and the game claims that it was popular with the porters that used to deliver cargo up and down the Thames. Before the chiral network, the weather station could only cover a very small area, and it couldn't really share information, so forecasts were small and almost completely worthless. After they get connected to the chiral network, they're able to collect data from all over and generate more comprehensible models to accurately track fluctuation in timefall and chiral density. Middle Knot City was nuked about a year ago by Homo Demons, but Fragile got caught kind of in the middle of everything. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in Higgs and Fragile's Chapter 3 lore summary videos. They also say that South Knot City was lost shortly after, but it doesn't seem that South Knot City was completely destroyed. They make a difference between talking about Middle Knot City being completely devastated and lost, and yet we're still going to make a delivery in this chapter to South Knot City. all these terrorist attacks kind of led people to wonder if joining the UCA was just about the worst choice they could even make. The more people said it out loud, of course, the more paranoid people got. And you see this when you're making deliveries to several of the preppers. It's like they feel like there's a bullseye on their back if they join the UCA. It's like attracting unwanted attention from terrorists. There's still fear around that terrorists are going to destroy everything that Bridges and the UCA is working for now. One of the preppers tells you that at least in their mind, Fragile's name is no longer Mud in South Knot City. You get kind of told this after Sam disposes of the nuke in the Tar Lake, and they kind of understand that Fragile was also working to save South Knot City, similarly to how Sam did. Middle Knot City, we already mentioned, was nuked, but it's important to remember that that city was obliterated by nukes after Bridges won. And then we also learn, like I said before, that we find out later in the chapter that it was half of South Knot City that was destroyed. Bridges decides in Chapter 3 to make deals with preppers to bolster their signal strength of the chiral network. They don't have the infrastructure available to them any longer to make one connection from the eastern part of the central region all the way to South Knot City. So in order to do that, they kind of have to make a deal with Fragile Express to use prepper shelters and their terminals to connect them to the chiral network, bolster the signal strength to be able to make their big connection all the way over to South Knot City. And, you know, this goes without saying. We've already kind of talked about this a little bit, but we also see that preppers are generally more comfortable with Fragile Express than with Bridges. We also hear in Chapter 3 from this section about Bridges and preppers and the UCA that Die Hardman tells Sam that the people of South Knot need supplies. This is right before you make your last delivery into South Knot City, but he tells them that they have just had a rough go of it. They're still being bothered by terrorists. They're still suffering through terrorist activity, and there's just a lot of things that have apparently been happening there that have given them kind of a bad way of things lately. Well, that's all for this lore summary video. I've been your logistics support officer, Fragile Boson. Keep on keeping on, and remember, tomorrow is in your hands.